Greetings, friendos, and welcome to the first video for the Oktoberfest season of 2022. This marks the third year in a row that we've done this exclusive series of videos, and I couldn't be more proud of how far we've come in such a short span of time. To get this party started, I figured we would take a look back at a somewhat obscure horror film from the tail end of the 1980s. The film in question is a then modern retelling of the universal horror classic, The Phantom of the Opera, and stars none other than Robert Englund, the man of your dreams Freddy Krueger himself, as the Phantom. For those unfamiliar, The Phantom of the Opera was originally a book published in France in 1910 by the author Gaston Leroux. The book itself originally began life being printed in installments in a French newspaper between September of 1909 and January of 1910, before being printed as a single book in March of 1910. Similar to how Stephen King's Shawshank Redemption came to be decades later. Then the story got translated from the written page to the silver screen for the first time in 1916. That silent film, which was called Das Phantom der Oper, also known as Das Gespenst im Opernhaus. Pardon my pronunciations, these titles are in German and that is not my first language. Regardless, the screenplay was written by Greta Schroeder and the film was approximately 75 minutes long. Unfortunately, this film has become lost media at some point over the last century since its creation. In 1925, another silent film adaptation was created by Rupert Julian. This one, thankfully, has not become lost media and stars Lon Chaney as the Phantom, and is much more widely known. Truth be told, I wasn't even aware of the 1916 version until I began to do research on this video. For this video, I should say. Anyway, the 1925 version premiered on September 6th in New York and ran through November 15th of that same year. In my research, I've discovered that this story has been made into at least 31 other films since 1925, but as stated previously, we're only going to be taking a look at one of those adaptations, this one being the 1989 version. So with all of that out of the way, prepare to get yourselves buckled in, buckos, because here we go. So here's the basic story of this particular version. We start off with a quote from St. John Vidius, whom, after a little bit of research, I have discovered never actually existed, on the day of their execution as it scrolls up the screen. Then we are introduced to this woman named Christine Day as she visits a sort of library in search for a piece of music to perform for her audition to join an opera troupe. We then get introduced to her friend Meg, who seems to have found just the piece of music Christine has been looking for. A song titled Don Juan Triumphant by one Eric Dessler. The name seems immediately familiar to Christine, but Meg seems confused by this and goes on to explain how she had to do a lot of digging to find anything on him. Meg has her read what she was able to find on the guy, mostly including some horrible murders, but then Christine just starts humming the tune out loud to herself. We then find out that Meg was only able to find a couple of pages of the opera thus far, and when asked where she found them, she just vaguely answers, "Over there," and gestures to a corner of the library. For some reason, this makes Christine smile awkwardly before she goes off in that direction to start digging. If I can just pause here for a moment, this is something that's stuck out to me right off the bat. Is it just me, or does Christine here bear a striking resemblance to Lydia Dietz from Beetlejuice? Am I wrong? Well, after some digging, Christine winds up finding the rest of the Don Juan Triumphant opera at the top of a precariously stacked pile of books. And then, wait. Hold on a moment. Is that the boom mic right up there in the corner?
Hello there.
That's me in the corner.
God, it must have been so hard to find good help back in 1989. As she's looking over the pages, we get a scene right out of Stephen King's It miniseries, as the words on the page begin to bleed. This blood spontaneously gets all over her hands, and a moment later, when Meg comes back to find her, suddenly her hands are all clean again. She brushes off the event and goes on to show her that she found the rest of the composition, and then the two leave. Next we see auditions taking place sometime in the near future. The first person seen on the stage gets sent away fairly quickly, being followed up almost immediately by Christine. She begins singing the composition, but is interrupted when a sandbag comes sailing down and strikes her, sending her falling backwards into a large mirror. This is the catalyst that sends us into the main portion of the film. After a really odd scene transition, in which someone keeps calling out for Christine and asking her to come back to them, we find ourselves transported to the year 1881. Yep, and I'm probably just about as confused as you all must feel. At this point in the movie, Christine wakes up on a stage in the middle of rehearsals for an opera. We find out that she had been roused from her unconscious state thanks to an alternate version of Meg. How fortunate that she has the same name as 1989 Christine's friend. Anyway, from here the movie is basically a period piece that does its best to portray 1880s London. Here we find that this Christine is an American trying to get into a prestigious opera house in London, and if she succeeds, then she will be the first to ever do so. Shortly after this point, we get introduced to the Phantom, just as he's, for lack of a better term, putting his face on. Gruesome, isn't it?
Maybe she's born with it.
After that, we get some backstory on the Phantom from some stage workers before the one who nearly KO'd Christine, a man by the name of Joseph, gets taken out by said Phantom and is spirited away.
There's an evil here. Laugh while you can. I've seen him. Moving on the catwalk. He's got eyes like fire. Death mask for a face.
So, your bumbling was the work of a ghost.
It was an accident.
But you blamed me. You're suspended.
Next, we get to see the Phantom interacting with Christine in her dressing room, which is shown rather oddly because in the mirror here, he is clearly right there. Yet Christine acts as though she's unable to see him as he compliments and dictates to her.
You were in fine voice today, Christine.
It's you, isn't it?
Next, we get some rather creepy voiceover from the Phantom as he claims to be her angel. They chat like this for a bit, and she even brings up the fact that he never shows himself to her, even though, as she says this, he's clearly right in front of her behind this pane of glass. Must be some kind of one-way mirror or something. Anyway, he has her sing for him, and after that we get to see the opera house where we are introduced to Carlotta, whom we instantly get to see as a royal... how do I put this lightly? She's a bit of a bitch to everyone. Shortly after that introduction, we get to see what's become of Joseph after his encounter with the Phantom earlier. This, of course, causes Carlotta to scream herself hoarse, and thus Christine is given her spot in the lead role. One detail that is pretty much glossed over in a literal blink and you'll miss it moment is that the opera being performed that night is Faust. An opera in 5 acts which was originally debuted on March 19th, 1859 at the Théâtre Lyrique in Paris, France. The story of Faust boils down to a scholarly old man making a deal with a devil named Mephistopheles in order to be with the young woman he adores, named Marguerite. But as with all tales of deals with devils, things do not go as planned, and the opera ends with Marguerite passing away and going on to heaven, while Faust, whom over the course of the opera has been transformed into a younger version of himself in order to be more appealing to her, falls to his knees in prayer after having watched her soul float up to the golden gates. At that point, Mephistopheles is turned away by the sword of the Archangel. This brief summary doesn't do the tale justice, so I shall leave a link to the Wikipedia entry about it down in the description below. Now getting back to the film. Christine is given the lead role in the opera due to the incident with Joseph and Carlotta earlier, much to the dismay of Bob, who happens to be one of the opera house's owners, who later goes on to bribe a well-known critic to give her, Christine, a bad review. Before this, however, we get to see some inspectors looking into the murder of Joseph, who is still hung up in the wardrobe in Carlotta's dressing room. We then get to see the Phantom as he enters his box at the Opera House, where Christine is to make her debut in place of Carlotta. Just popping in to say that knowing a bit about the story of Faust helps to understand the scene that's unfolding on stage before the Phantom as he's taking his seat, but it is not necessary to be able to enjoy the film. The scene taking place on stage triggers a flashback where we find out why it is that the Phantom looks the way that he does. Here we learn that his actual name is Eric Dessler, and that he, much like Faust, made a deal with the devil. Only in place of a woman to love and fawn over him, he simply wanted to be loved for his music. This wish was granted, but at the cost of his face being permanently marred and branded with scars, making him unable to be loved by anyone who were to look upon him. It's only now that I realize that, from the nose up at least, the Phantom looks remarkably like Hawkeye from the TV show MASH. Then it's back to the investigation, then back to the Phantom watching the opera. The show ends and he goes off into the streets of London, where he encounters several ladies of the night, while his disguise is starting to fall apart. He encounters one who resembles Christine, and escorts her to a hotel or a brothel where they enjoy themselves, for lack of a better term. While this is going on, Christine and Richard, the other owner of the opera house, along with the others from the troupe, go out to a lavish dinner. It is here where Bob seals the deal with that critic about giving Christine a bad review. Next we find the Phantom at a pub after having had his fun, where he's seen composing in a dark corner. A couple of ruffians noticed the waitress who had just served him a drink was paid in gold and decided to try and get him to gamble with them to get some of that money for themselves. He declines and finds himself being tailed by the trio later after leaving the pub, and the trio try to corner him in a dark alley. They try to mug him, but find out that they are no match for him, as he dispatches them quickly and handily one by one, even going so far as to toss the head of one of the would-be muggers at their leader, who then attempts to flee, but is quickly cornered and slain by the Phantom, who then places a gold coin on either of his eyes. The next day we see that Meg has gotten the newspaper containing the critique from the night before, and sees how badly Christine's name has been dragged through the mud by that critic. This review, of course, doesn't sit well with the Phantom, who goes on to murder him in a Turkish bathhouse later. After that, we find Christine as she's leaving the boarding house, where she's been staying with the other women from the opera troupe. She boards a coach and heads off to visit her father's grave. As she's leaving, though, Richard arrives and tries to stop her, but is just a few moments too late as her coach pulls away. He hails one of his own and follows after her, only catching up after she's reached the cemetery. It is here that she encounters the Phantom, who has a coach ready and waiting for her, luring her to him by playing the violin. Richard tries to chase after her to prevent this, but is held up by a latched gate, and then by the Phantom himself playing a high-pitched note on his violin before taking off, driving the coach away with Christine inside. He whisks her off into the night to his lair. It should be noted here that he's put his disguise back together between the fight with those muggers and now. Once within his lair, she finds his unfinished opera, Don Juan Triumphant, and convinces him to play it for her. As he does so, she begins singing the words, and he becomes confused since he has never shared them with anyone before now. He then becomes more enraptured by her because of this, and forces a ring upon her finger, declaring that she is now married to the music. She's hesitant, but agrees to it before he states that, tonight, you will be my bride. Next, it's back to the investigation, where we find Richard with the inspector in a church. Richard is concerned for Christine's well-being, and the inspector states that Richard's own life is in jeopardy, and declares that the murderer is in your house, before showing him some of the crime scene photos that he's gathered. He reveals that he's pieced together that these murders have all been done in the name of Christine Day. He then goes on to claim that he believes the Phantom is to blame for all of these killings, and reveals the name of this supposed spook to be none other than that of Eric Dessler, which we, the audience, had already known thanks to Christine just a scene or two earlier. And he claims that Dessler has been living beneath the Opera House. Now we get to see Eric removing yet another one of his macabre masks.
And it said the only way to destroy his music.
I don't believe in phantoms or legends. This creature is still alive. Still alive.
This one is far more elaborate than his previous patch job, which unfortunately I can't show too much of, or YouTube will come down on me hard. And nobody wants that, do they? Moving on, Christine is back home and is trying to remove the ring, but it's stuck fast on her finger. She finds out from Meg about the death of that critic, who we only now find out is named Harrison. Either that or I missed hearing it earlier on. Shortly after that revelation, Richard arrives trying to find Christine. Christine, of course, doesn't want to face him, so she has Meg deliver a hastily written note to him before sending him away. He leaves, but not before stating that Christine's in a great deal of danger. As that's going on, Eric seems to be keeping an eye on Richard. After a brief scene in which Christine is still shown trying to remove the ring, we are transported to a ball which Christine had written about in the note to Richard earlier, asking him to meet her there that evening. Eventually, the pair manage to find each other. We also see that the inspectors have arrived. Eric has also made it to the ball and isn't too happy when he overhears Richard talking with Christine, and her professing her love for him. He then takes out his aggressions by murdering Carlotta and dumping her head into the stew pot on a catering cart before stealing away with Christine. While at the ball, one of the inspectors bumps into a character whom we saw briefly earlier. The Ratcatcher had one of the catering tables. He agrees to show them where the Phantom lives after being promised to get paid even more than Eric, the Phantom, would pay him to keep his secret. When Eric kidnaps Christine, Richard and the inspectors go to give chase, but are halted when the Ratcatcher informs them that he went down. He then leads them to the secret tunnels leading to Eric's lair. We then see Eric unceremoniously dump Christine onto the ground in his lair, where he proceeds to berate her for her disloyalty regarding what she was saying to Richard at the ball. Then he removes the skull mask he had been wearing and reveals his true face, which causes her to scream in fright. He then promises that she'll never leave there again, after she pleads for him to let her go. Soon after this, we hear yelling echoing from somewhere nearby, as the inspectors and Richard find their way into the maze-like sewers that lead to this lair. He leaves her on the ground after telling her again that she can never leave. We then focus in on the inspectors and Richard as the Ratcatcher brings them to the hatch/trapdoor, through which they'll find Eric and Christine. They start heading down, but the catcher splits off, telling them that if he doesn't clear the rats, then they won't get far. He then instructs them to stay to the right and keep going down, 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 before walking off out of earshot. Now it's back over to Christine as she finds her way out of the lair and into the winding sewers. She hears Richard's voice echoing in the distance and tries to follow, but just winds up in the organ room again, where she proceeds to drop against the wall and slumps down to the floor in despair. We cut over to the Ratcatcher as Eric finds him. Catcher tries bargaining with him, stating that Eric won't kill him since, if he does, then the rats will be all over him. That Eric needs him to lead the vermin away. to which Eric replies by saying, "Then we terminate," before picking him up and steering him through the back with a pike that was jutting out of the wall, causing him to scream in agony before passing away. Richard's group hears the scream, and Inspector Mustache sends Inspector Davis and Constable Morris in one direction, directing them to keep to the right and mark their way while he and Richard go in the opposite direction. After splitting up, Inspector Davis and the constable wind up almost immediately finding Eric, and give chase after Davis shoots and misses them. At this point, Eric does the best impression I've ever heard of one of these old Halloween decorations from back in the day. Next, we briefly cut back to Richard and Inspector Mustache as they continue their quest to find Christine. Then back to Davis, who winds up shooting the constable after kicking open the door, and Eric calling out, "Here I am!" He runs off after this and runs right into Eric, who proceeds to catch him in the neck. He then knocks Davis's gun away before stabbing him in the stomach. We then cut back to Richard and the inspector as they stumble upon the remains of the rat catcher before continuing their search. We are then thrust back into the organ room where Christine is still slumped on the floor when Eric arrives. She asks if he is going to kill her, to which he cryptically replies,
Everyone dies. I only choose the time and place for a few.
She then questions when that time will be for her. He then cryptically replies to that with,
This is either a wedding march or a funeral mass. You decide which.
Before beginning to play the organ, which leads the inspector and Richard straight to them. As they enter, the inspector quips that Richard should watch his skin.
Watch your skin.
Watch your skin. I see what you did there. And here I was beginning to think the inspector didn't have a sense of humor. Eric has hidden himself, allowing Christine to lure Richard to him before grabbing her to use as a human shield. Now, Eric's major blunder here is that he never learned that one should never bring a knife to a gunfight. Richard quickly shoots Eric's knife hand, and the sudden shock from the pain causes him to loosen his grip on Christine long enough for Richard to get her loose and attempts to apprehend him. Eric knocks Richard prone and then tosses Christine away when she attempts to grapple with him. As they continue their struggle, Inspector Mustache comes up to try and intervene, but gets knocked down a set of stairs. Then Eric gets Richard pinned against the tower of wax that had the candle holders embedded into it that he's been using to illuminate the room all this time. He proceeds to pull one of these sharp metal pieces out from the wax spire, the center of the room, and uses it to stab Richard in the side, causing the man to let out one of the weakest cries of pain I have ever heard. He sounds more surprised and shocked than anything. It's a reaction more fitting to get a purple nurple than being stabbed. Come on! The wax on his jacket then spontaneously combusts, and Eric tosses him off of a ledge. This causes Christine to start knocking over various candle holders that were standing around the room, which causes the lit candles to begin to catch the place on fire. What, was the entire set made out of paper towels or something? Sheesh! When Eric takes his eyes off of her as he's making his way around the burning room, Christine spots Richard's gun and grabs it, hiding the hand holding it from him before he gets a line of sight on her again. He then steps up to claim her again, and she lets him have it. Infuriated, he knocks the gun away and grabs her by the arm. At this point, the story remembers Inspector Mustache, who gets a clear shot at Eric, and takes it along with several others, shooting the scar-faced man 3 times before he stumbles backwards, and inadvertently removes the ring he had placed on Christine's finger earlier as he falls backwards. And here's where Christine charges forth in slow motion and knocks over another candle holder, this one shattering a mirror and giving the cameraman his very own cameo in the film. The shattering of the mirror somehow brings us back to Christine in 1989, as Eric calls out for her to come back! back! Come back! Back in the present 80s, Christine wakes up in a pile of mirror shards as everyone seems to rush the stage to check on her. Then someone who looks suspiciously like Robert Englund cosplaying Anton Ego from Ratatouille comes up onto the stage. He checks if she's alright, and then, even before he finds out if she's actually okay, he lets her know that she got the part she was auditioning for at the start of the movie. Boy, doesn't that feel like a lifetime ago. Meg then steps in as she proclaims that she is Christine's manager, and then she and the guy who was holding the auditions in the first place go off somewhere, while England takes her back to his place, promising her a night she'll never forget. When they get to his place, he tells her that he needs to go freshen up, and goes upstairs to do so. While he's up there, he notices a blemish on his cheek. Why does that look so familiar? Then it's revealed that he had a frosted glass case with 3 identical masks of his own face inside. Aha! I figured it out! They must have used this scene as inspiration when they were making the TV version of the Goosebumps book, The Haunted Mask. Man, I'm a huge nerd. As this is going on, Christine wanders around his flat and stumbles across a music studio of sorts, complete with electronic keyboards and a computer. She also finds he's printed out the sheet music from Don Juan Triumphant. Then she notices a container of floppy disks, which are what people used to use to store data back in the day, back before external hard drives, SD cards, and thumb drives, also known as flash drives. For those youngins in the viewing audience who may not know, now you know. She picks one up before inserting it into the computer. The program on the disk boots up and starts playing Don Juan Triumphant rather loudly through the speakers. She starts frantically trying to shut it off before her host hears, but it's a bit too late for that, as we see in the background there. He comes back with his new face on and asks her how she liked the music. Then he starts giving off some real creeper vibes, as it starts to become more clear that he is in fact Eric. Apparently, along with being loved for his music, he must have also been granted eternal life so long as his music remains. In retrospect, that's not that bad, aside from, you know, the whole having a face not even your mother would love. Christine pretends to be lured in by his advances, but then proceeds to tear off his face to reveal his true, burnt, nasty face beneath. The way his face just tears here reminds me greatly of this one character from the film Little Monsters. What do you think? Do you see a resemblance? This, for some reason, makes him develop a wheezing cough. He proclaims that he's waited a very long time for her. He also adds that they had a bargain, and randomly also adds the word forever. Then she grabs a sharp-looking object off of a nearby table, stabs him in the stomach with it, and cries out, "Not further!" He recoils and falls back against a wall, slumping to the floor as she rushes past to get to the printer and grab the sheet music, as well as the floppy disk, before rushing outside, where she rips the papers in half, before dumping them unceremoniously down a storm drain, along with the floppy disk. This, for some reason, seems to finally kill Eric, as he gives off a scream of, "My music!" and goes limp. Then, as she's walking along a random street, she passes by a street performer playing the violin. She tosses some change into his case and starts to walk away, but then he begins to play some eerily familiar music. Don Juan Triumphant, to be exact. She looks back for a moment before turning around and continuing to walk along before the scene fades to black and the credits begin to roll. Yep, that's how they chose to end this thing. Just Christine walking off into the darkness after coming into contact with someone who knew a piece of music that they honestly probably shouldn't. This leaves the viewer, or at least myself, wondering, since that song still exists in one form or another, doesn't that technically mean that Eric is also still around? But that's one hell of an awkward ending, I must say. It feels like a cliffhanger, But considering that, to my knowledge, they never actually made an official sequel to this, that doesn't quite seem to be the case here. But also, I found out during my research that they did intend to make a sequel to this, but when this film tanked at the box office, they went ahead and rewrote that script and turned it into a different film, Dance Macabre, which also, somewhat ironically, stars Robert Englund, but that was released in 1992. Regardless, I'm interested to know what you all thought of this little treasure. Personally, I enjoyed it a bit even with all of its flaws, and with that said, I do recommend this film if you can happen to get a copy of it for yourself, or if you can find it streaming somewhere. On that note, I want to thank you all so very much for tuning in. I do truly and greatly appreciate it. And with that, I say unto you, my viewers, that I will see you all in the next episode. Later.